and, and strikes in France are related to the president's attempt to increase the age of retirement by 2 years, from 62 to 64, because he says, without delaying the year or the age by which people retire, the government will be bankrupt. It won't be able to pay pensions. But it seems French people don't want to look at the mathematics of that. I haven't looked at the actual proposal. I think it would be very unfair to tell somebody who is 61 in France, who's been planning to retire next year, oh no, you have to work another 3 years. I hope the proposal says something like, well, if you're over 50, you can still retire when you're 62 because you're old, or getting old and you've been planning. But ukiwa bara kijana, you'll have to work till 64. I don't know exactly how that bill has been drafted. I've been too busy to look at it. Anyway, all I'm saying that these kinds of problems that we're having in Kenya are not unique to us. And in a democracy, it is a contest, a political contest, even when the next election is not very close. It's a contest, whether it's in France, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in England or Kenya, to win over people's support for the argument that you are making. And that's what we see happening in all of these countries at the moment. Which also, to just conclude, is another reason why I think surveys such as this one that we at TIFA have just done are very important, both for leaders and citizens, so they can see, it's very easy for a small group of people to cause a lot of trouble. When I was teaching at the university, if I had 3 or 4 students who were complaining about my teaching methods, they could go to the head of our department and cause trouble. But the other 40 or 50 or 60 students in the class who were happy with the way I was teaching, they kept quiet. So in fact, once our chairman had to come to my class and do a survey right in front of me. How many of you are happy with Dr. Wolf's teaching? That was my great friend, Professor Walter Oyugi. So he did a survey right there. But in public space, people who make the most noise are the ones who are often heard. But that can be misleading. And that's why we think these surveys are very important. The last thing I'll say is, and I've given this example before, one of the reasons that Emperor Haile Selassie was overthrown in Ethiopia during the famine of 1974 and later executed was that he had no idea how many people in that country were dying of starvation. There were no surveys. His intelligence people were afraid to tell him because he was the emperor sent by the Almighty and they didn't want to offend him. So when all of these tens of thousands of people marched on his palace in Addis, it came as a surprise to him. No leader who wants to be successful, and the basic criterion of being successful is to stay in power and win your next election if you're allowed to have one. You want to pay close attention to what your citizens are experiencing. And in addition to government intelligence and whatever confidential surveys the government may be doing, or even the opposition may be doing, we think we're also playing our part in making these realities clear, not just to the leaders, but also to ordinary Kenyans. So thank you very much for your attention. If we have any questions, please feel free to ask. But as I say, don't ask such a tough question that I can't answer. Yes, sir. And just tell me where you're from before you ask your question.
My name is Romano from West TV.
West TV, thank you.
Yeah. My question is about, you just talked about removal of the subsidies. Do you think, as a researcher, if the subsidies can be brought back on some of the goods on the petroleum and other commodities, will it be any better?
When you say be any better, do you think there would be more support for the government?
No, on the livelihood, the economic impact on the Kenyans.
Well, what I see that you people are reporting in the news, this is one of the main requests that I see people on the street making, whether they've been involved in the protests or not. I don't have the facts, but if we just took those respondents who said that somebody in their household, whether them or somebody else, always or often goes to sleep hungry, if we correlated that with what they felt was the main problem facing people in their area, I bet you 50 shillings, that 90% of them at least would say cost of living is the main problem for them. Or hunger or drought, especially if they're northern Kenya or lower eastern. So I don't think the question really, I mean, thank you for your question, it's a good one, but I think the question, the more difficult question is, what is it that makes it difficult for the government to bring those subsidies back? Because it's clear that would alleviate the suffering of many people. And I think you have to ask people in government, before you would bring back these subsidies that we have before, what would have to happen? Where would the money come from? Where could we find it? We also know that the Kenya government, like many governments, especially in developing countries, need to get loans from the IMF and so on, and they sometimes impose conditions. Like cost sharing in universities came up 20 years ago, I think, as an IMF condition. That was after I'd left campus, but still. So it's good to ask people who are in positions of authority, what would have to happen, what would you need to have in terms of resources before you could bring back these subsidies, and at what level do you think they should be? Because if the subsidies are too high, then you encourage inefficient production. So, and because of the regional competitive market, especially in agriculture, and global through the WTO, you have to make sure that your costs of production are not so high. That's one of the main complaints that have been made about electricity in Kenya, that its per unit cost is higher than in Uganda and Tanzania, which undermines the competitiveness of the goods that are produced by factories that use electricity. So it's a very important question. I certainly cannot speak on behalf of government. Any other good question like that one? Yes, just tell me where you're from.
Hi, sir. Good afternoon.